She heard them coming before she saw them. Abigail Turner pressed her back against the kitchen wall, flour still dusting her hands, and listened to the sound of hooves slowing on the road outside. Through the cracked window, she could already see her mother straightening Clara's dress, fussing over Clara's hair. Abigail looked down at herself, her wide hands, her thick arms, her dress stretched tight across the shoulders, and she made a quiet, private decision. She would not watch. She went back to the bread. That was the only thing anyone needed from her anyway. If this story moves something in your chest, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1857 had no mercy on the Wyoming Territory. The heat came down flat and mean, baking the wagon road to dust, cracking the wood on the trading post sign until the letters peeled and curled. Thomas Turner had painted that sign himself 12 years earlier, proud and laughing, a man who believed the frontier would reward the faithful. But Thomas Turner had been dead for 3 years, and the frontier had rewarded nobody. It had only taken. Abigail Turner knew that better than anyone. She had been awake since before sunrise, the way she was every morning. While the valley still held a thin, gray cool, she had hauled water from the creek, restocked the shelves with the last of the dry goods, repaired the latch on the storage room door that kept working itself loose, and started 3 loaves of bread in the cast iron oven. By the time the sun cleared the ridge and turned the dust to gold, she had already done more work than most people did in a full day. She was 27 years old. She was big, broad through the shoulders, heavy through the middle, her hands red and rough from work. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and she had stopped hoping anyone would ever look at her the way men looked at Clara. Clara was 22 and beautiful in the way that made grown men forget their own names. She had soft yellow hair and a laugh that carried across a room, and a way of tilting her head when she smiled that made every man in a 50-mile radius feel like he was the most important person on the earth. Men had ridden 2 days out of their way just to trade at the Turner post. Abigail had always understood why. She had accepted it the same way she accepted the heat and the debt and the broken latch. As a fact of the world, hard and permanent, not worth wasting breath on. But today was different. Today, a man named Nathan Cole was coming to the valley. Abigail heard it first from old Pete Garland, who came through on a supply run 3 days prior, and leaned across the counter with the particular excitement of a man who knows he's carrying good news. "You heard about Cole?" he asked, setting his coins down slow, drawing it out. "I heard the name," Abigail said without looking up from the ledger. "Mountain trapper. Runs a stretch of high valley land north of the Sweetwater. Got himself a proper cabin, 20 head of cattle, and more pelts than any man I've heard of working solo." Pete paused for effect. "And he ain't married." "Good for him," Abigail said. Pete laughed. "Word is he's coming through looking for a wife. Serious-like. Not a dance hall wife. A real one. A woman who can handle frontier life." He looked at her with a meaningful expression that she refused to meet. "I reckon your mama's already heard." Abigail had set down her pen at that. "When?" 3 days. She had gone back to the ledger, but her hand didn't write anything for a long moment. By the following morning, Eleanor Turner had transformed the trading post into something resembling a stage. "Clara, come out of that shadow. The light is better by the window." Eleanor's voice cut through the heat like a blade. She was 51 and looked it. A thin woman with tight gray-streaked hair and eyes that were always calculating something. She had loved Thomas Turner with everything she had, and when he died, she had channeled that love directly into survival, which, in her understanding, meant getting her beautiful daughter married to a man with land and money before the debts took the roof over their heads. "Mama, I'm fine where I am." Clara said from the rocking chair near the window. She was fanning herself with a folded piece of paper, her dress fresh and pale blue, her hair pinned up just so. "You're not fine. You're slouching. Sit up. He'll be here before noon." "You don't know that." "I know men like this. They ride early." "Abigail." Eleanor turned sharply. "Abigail, get out of the kitchen. You look like you've been dragged behind a wagon." Abigail stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "The bread needs another 20 minutes. "I don't care about the bread. You will when there's nothing to serve him." Eleanor pressed her lips together. Then, "Fine, but when you come out, for the love of God, change your dress." "This is my work dress." "He is not coming to see your work dress." "He's not coming to see me at all, Mama," Abigail said. She said it quietly, with no bitterness in it, the way a person states something that is simply true. "He's coming to see Clara. Let me finish the bread." Eleanor stared at her for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Guilt, or grief, or something she didn't have time to examine. And then she turned back to Clara and said nothing more to Abigail. Abigail went back to the oven. She told herself she didn't mind. She almost believed it. Nathan Cole arrived at 10:30. Abigail heard the horse first. A single set of hooves, unhurried, no creak of a wagon. A man who traveled alone and didn't need much. She stayed at the stove, listening without meaning to, as her mother's voice rose in welcome, and Clara laughed that soft, pretty laugh that carried all the way to the kitchen. "Mr. Cole, we are so pleased you found us. I'm Eleanor Turner, and this is my daughter Clara." A low voice, measured. "Ma'am, miss." "Please, come in out of that heat. Clara, take Mr. Cole's hat." "Oh, I'll keep it, thank you." Still that low, even voice, not rude, just certain. Abigail pressed the heel of her hand against the bread, testing it. 2 more minutes. She could hear them settling in the front room, the scrape of chairs, her mother's determined cheerfulness. Clara beginning the performance that she had been rehearsing for 3 days. How she loved the Wyoming skies. How she had always admired men who built things with their own hands. How she could cook and sew and manage a household. Abigail pulled the bread from the oven. She set it on the cooling rack. She untied her apron. Then she heard his voice again, clearer this time, because he had apparently moved toward the doorway between the front room and the kitchen. She did not know he was standing there until she turned around and nearly walked into him. She stepped back. He stepped back. They looked at each other. Nathan Cole was not what she had expected. She had expected a showman. The frontier was full of them. Men who had done moderately well and traveled on that fact like a horse. He was not that. He was somewhere past 40, lean through the jaw, with sun-darkened skin and calm gray eyes that didn't slide away from her, the way most men's did when they got their first look at her. He was wearing a plain canvas shirt, worn through at one elbow, and he was holding his hat in his hands now, turning it slowly by the brim, the way a man does when he is thinking. "Beg your pardon," he said. "Wasn't watching where I was going." "Neither was I," she said. "Something smells good." "Bread." "Figured." He glanced past her at the cooling rack. "You make it?" "Every day." He nodded, like this was information he was filing away. "I'm Nathan Cole." "I know who you are," she said. "I'm Abigail Turner." A pause. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. "The older sister," he said. "That's right." "Your mother didn't mention you." Abigail held his gaze. "No, she wouldn't have." He looked at her for another moment, not the way men usually looked at her, which was to say, not with pity or discomfort or the carefully polite non-expression people wore when they were trying not to react to something. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he is genuinely interested in solving. Then Clara's voice floated in from the front room, bright and a little sharp at the edges. "Mr. Cole? Mama says supper will be ready soon." He glanced toward the doorway, then back at Abigail. "Your bread?" "My bread," she said. "Then I reckon I'll look forward to it." He tipped his head, not quite a bow, not quite a nod, something in between, and went back to the front room. Abigail stood in the kitchen for a long moment after he left. She told herself that meant nothing. She went back to work. Supper was Eleanor Turner's finest performance. She had laid the table with the good cloth that only came out at Christmas, and the 2 matching plates that hadn't been chipped. She had put wildflowers in a tin cup at the center. She had seated Nathan Cole at the head of the table as though he already owned the place, with Clara on his right and herself on his left. And she had directed Abigail to the far end as naturally as if that had always been the arrangement. Abigail sat and said nothing. Clara shone. There was no other word for it. She was clever with conversation, asking Nathan questions that let him talk without making him feel interrogated, laughing at the right moments, touching her hair once or twice in a way that was perfectly calculated to look entirely natural. Abigail watched her with something that was not quite resentment and not quite admiration, but lived in the uncomfortable space between them. 12 years in the High Valley, Clara was saying. That must get so lonely. You get used to it, Nathan said. I don't think I could. I need people around me. Clara smiled. Don't you ever wish you had someone to come home to? That's why I'm here, he said, and he said it plainly, without the romantic coloring that Clara was clearly hoping for. Eleanor jumped in smoothly. Clara is very accomplished. She can sew beautifully, and she's wonderful with children. We've had neighbors' little ones here many times. Who manages the post? Nathan asked. Eleanor blinked. I beg your pardon? The trading post. He gestured broadly. Who runs it, keeps the books, handles the traders, decides what to stock? There was a small silence. We all contribute, Eleanor said carefully. Nathan looked at Abigail. Miss Turner. Abigail looked up from her plate. Who made this bread? Clara laughed softly. We all worked on supper together, Mr. Cole. It was a family. I didn't ask about supper, he said, still looking at Abigail. I asked about the bread, specifically. Who made it? Another silence. This one had edges. I did, Abigail said. Thought so. He tore off another piece, unhurried. It's the best bread I've had in 12 years. Maybe more. Clara's smile tightened at the corners. Eleanor's eyes moved between Nathan and Abigail with an expression that was trying very hard to stay pleasant. Abigail is a wonderful cook, Eleanor offered. I noticed, Nathan said. He reached for the water pitcher, and as he did, he looked across the table at Abigail again, with those calm gray eyes, and said, The ledger on the shelf behind the counter. That your work, too? Abigail set down her fork. Yes. Numbers are clean, columns lined up right. Most posts this size don't keep books that careful. Most posts this size are losing money, she said. Careful books are the only reason we still have a roof. Abigail, her mother said quietly. No, she's right. Nathan leaned back in his chair. I've seen trading posts fail from bad accounting more than bad luck. That's a real skill, Miss Turner. There was a silence at the table that had a new quality to it, something stunned and unbalanced, as if the room had tilted slightly on its axis, and none of them were sure yet how to stand. Clara was staring at her plate. Eleanor was staring at Nathan. Nathan was looking at Abigail as if she were a piece of mathematics he had just successfully solved. And Abigail was looking back at him, with the exact expression of a woman who has been waiting her entire life to be spoken to like a person, and has just been ambushed by it at supper. Thank you, she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. Nathan just nodded, like it was nothing, like complimenting a woman's work was the most natural thing in the world, and reached for the bread again. After supper, while Eleanor kept Nathan talking in the front room, and Clara retreated to the porch with barely concealed fury, Abigail washed the dishes. She could hear her mother's voice rising and falling in the careful music of a woman working hard towards something. She heard Nathan's replies, short, measured, giving nothing away. She heard Clara come back inside after a while, heard her sit down and try again, heard the bright, determined performance restart. Abigail dried each plate slowly. She thought about the way he had said her name, Miss Turner, not looking at Clara when he said it, not looking at her mother, just at her, as if she were the answer to a question he had been carrying for a long time. She told herself she was being foolish. Men like Nathan Cole did not ride out of the mountains for women like her. He was practical, that was all. He had noticed her accounting and her bread because they were useful to him, the way a good horse or a solid roof was useful. It did not mean anything beyond that. It would be dangerous to let herself think it meant anything beyond that. She had made that mistake before. Once, years ago, a traveling merchant's son had been kind to her for 3 days while his father's wagon was being repaired. He had talked to her at the counter and laughed at things she said and asked her opinion on matters, and she had been so starved for it that she had built an entire future in her mind before she understood that he was only passing time. He had left without a backward glance. She had cried alone in the storeroom for an hour and then gone back to work and not made that mistake again. She was not going to make it now. She set the last dish on the rack and hung up the cloth and went to check the storeroom latch. It was loose again. She found a nail and a rock from the yard and fixed it by lamplight, crouching in the dirt, her skirt bunched up around her knees, sweating in the heat that didn't break even after dark. When she stood up and turned around, Nathan Cole was standing in the yard. She startled. "Good Lord!" "Sorry," he held up a hand. "Didn't mean to scare you. Stepped out for some air." "Most people announce themselves." "Most people don't fix door latches in the dark." He looked at the latch, then at her. "That thing been giving trouble?" "For a month." "What did you use to fix it?" "Nail and a rock." He was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, "That'll hold better if you angle it 15 degrees to the right. The wood's pulling away from the frame on that side. You can see it in the gap. Angle the nail into solid wood. It won't work itself loose." Abigail looked at the latch. She could see what he meant. "I'll remember that," she said. He nodded. He didn't leave. The night was hot and still and full of insect sound. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called twice and went quiet. Abigail stood with a rock in her hand and waited for him to say something else or go back inside. "Your mother's a determined woman," he said finally. "Yes. She wants me to court Clara." "I know what she wants," Abigail said. She kept her voice even. "It's a reasonable hope. Clara is... she would make a man a good wife. She's young and she's..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's good at making people feel welcome." "She is that," he said. "Then I don't imagine you found anything lacking." He turned the hat in his hands again, that slow circle. "I'm not looking for what I'm supposed to find," he said. "I spent 42 years doing what I was supposed to do. Went to the mountains when my father said go. Trapped when the company said trap. Stayed north when the wars came south." He paused. "I ain't got years left to spend on supposed to." Abigail stared at him. "That's an interesting thing to say to a woman you just met." "I reckon it is." He looked at her directly, and it was still that same quality of attention. Not intrusive, not hungry, just genuine. "But you're an honest woman, Miss Turner. I could tell that at supper. I'd rather say something true to an honest woman than something pretty to someone who won't remember it." She didn't know what to do with that. She had no framework for it. The entire architecture of her self-understanding, the careful structure she had built over 27 years to keep from hurting, was not designed to accommodate a man who looked at her and said the word honest, like it was a high compliment. "You should go back inside," she said. "My mother will notice." "Your mother knows where I am," he said easily. "I told her I was stepping out." He put his hat back on. "Good night, Miss Turner." "Good night, Mr. Cole." He walked back to the door. At the threshold, he paused without turning around. "That bread genuinely was the best I've had in years," he said. "I wanted you to know I meant it. I wasn't saying it to be polite." He went inside. Abigail stood in the dark yard for a long time. The owl called again, once, from somewhere far off. She looked down at the rock still in her hand, set it quietly on the ground, and stood up straight. She was being foolish. She went back inside and climbed the stairs to the small, hot room she shared with Clara in the summer when the heat was too much for the upper attic, and she lay down on her narrow cot and stared at the ceiling and told herself, very firmly, that tomorrow he would make his intentions clear, and his intentions would be for Clara, and that would be that, and she would be fine. She believed it. She just didn't sleep. Across the room, in the good bed by the window, Clara was not sleeping either. "He barely looked at me after supper," Clara said to the ceiling. Her voice was quiet, but it had something jagged in it. "Go to sleep, Clara." "He talked to you, at the table. He asked about your bread." "He's polite." "He's not polite to me. He's polite. There's a difference." Abigail said nothing. "Abigail." Clara turned on her side. In the dark, her voice lost some of its performance. The brightness was gone, and what was underneath was younger and less certain. "Do you think he finds me dull?" "I think he's practical," Abigail said carefully. "I think he's looking for particular things, and he's testing what he sees against what he needs." "And what do I lack?" The question sat in the hot, dark room. Abigail chose her words with great care. "You've never had to struggle, Clara. It shows in how you talk. You speak about frontier life like it's a romance. He's lived it for 12 years. He knows what it costs." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Is that what he said?" "That's what I saw." Another silence. "You like him," Clara said. "I don't know him." "But you like him." "Go to sleep." Clara was quiet for a long time. Then, "Mama needs this to work, Abigail. You know that." "I know." "If he doesn't choose me, go to sleep," Abigail said again, soft but final. And this time, Clara did. Abigail lay in the dark and breathed. She thought about what he had said. "I ain't got years left to spend on supposed to." She thought about the way he had looked at the ledger, the way he had asked, specific and direct, "Who made this bread?" She thought about the latch and his voice in the dark. "I wanted you to know I meant it." And the careful, solid weight of a man who didn't say things just to fill silence. She pressed her hand flat against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat, and she made herself a promise. She would not hope. She would not build anything in her mind that didn't exist. She would go downstairs in the morning and make breakfast, and manage the post, and be exactly what she had always been. And she would let Nathan Cole make his choice, and she would be fine. She was good at being fine. She closed her eyes. Down the hall, the floor creaked once. Nathan Cole, still awake. And then went quiet. Outside, the Wyoming summer held its hot, airless breath. And in the small room at the top of the stairs, Abigail Turner lay perfectly still and did not sleep at all. Morning came fast and unforgiving, the way mornings always did in the Wyoming Territory. Abigail was already at the stove when she heard the first boot hit the floor upstairs. She had been awake for an hour, moving through the kitchen in the gray pre-dawn quiet, starting the fire, measuring the coffee, doing the things her hands knew how to do without being asked. Work had always been the safest place she knew. When her hands were busy, her mind had less room to do damage. She heard Nathan come down the stairs. She heard him pause in the doorway. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Enough," she said, without turning around. He was quiet for a moment. Then she heard the scrape of a chair and understood he had sat down at the kitchen table. Not the front room, not the porch, but the kitchen where she was working. She turned around then, because she had to, because it would have been strange not to. He was sitting with his elbows on the table and his hands wrapped around nothing, waiting for the coffee she hadn't poured yet. His hair was still rough from sleep. He looked like a man who woke up the same way every morning, without ceremony, without complaint. "You don't have to sit in here," she said. "I know," he said. "Coffee smells good." She poured it and set it in front of him and went back to the stove. "How long have you been running this post alone?" he asked. "I haven't been running it alone. Your mother manages the social side of things," he said. "Keeps people comfortable. That's a skill. But the books, the stock, the suppliers, that's you." She didn't answer immediately. She turned the skillet, keeping her back to him. 3 years, she said finally, "since my father died." "How old were you?" 24. He was quiet. She could feel him thinking from across the room. "And before that?" he asked. "I was helping him since I was 14. She set the skillet aside. "He couldn't read well. Numbers made his head hurt. So I learned." "Who taught you?" "He bought me a ledger book and a pencil and told me to figure it out." She paused. "I figured it out." Nathan said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's more than most men I know could say." "Most men I know would never have to," she said. And she said it without heat, just plainly, the way she said most things. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, quiet and brief. She heard him drink his coffee, and for a few minutes, the kitchen was just the kitchen. Fire and heat and the smell of coffee, and two people sitting in the particular ease of people who do not need to perform for each other. Then Clara came downstairs. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in a clean dress, her hair brushed and pinned, and she took in the scene. Nathan at the table, Abigail at the stove, the 2 cups of coffee, with an expression that she smoothed over in less than a second. But Abigail saw it. That quick flash of something sharp and startled, there and gone. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," Clara said, her voice warm and bright, as though she'd been awake and cheerful for hours. "Morning, Miss Clara," he said. She came into the kitchen and stood near Abigail, reaching for a cup. "Did you sleep well? The summer nights out here can be so difficult if you're not used to the heat." "I slept fine," he said. "Abigail never sleeps well in summer," Clara offered, glancing sideways at her sister. "She's always up before anyone." "I noticed," Nathan said, and something in the way he said it, just 2 words, flat and simple, made Clara go still for just a moment before she smiled again. Eleanor appeared 10 minutes later, dressed and composed, and breakfast became the thing that supper had been. A careful arrangement, a performance of hospitality. Nathan at the center of it. But something had shifted, and all 4 of them could feel it. The air in the room had a different weight than it had the night before, and Eleanor's eyes kept moving between Nathan and Abigail with a calculation that was becoming, slowly, something more like unease. After breakfast, 3 traders came through. This was the natural order of things at the Turner post. Men passing through, needing supplies, needing credit, needing someone to settle a dispute about weight or price. Abigail moved behind the counter and became a different person. Not the woman from the kitchen. Something more. She knew every man's credit history by memory. She knew what fair price was for every good on the shelf. When a trader named Buckley tried to renegotiate a debt he owed with an argument that would only work on someone who hadn't been tracking the numbers, She stopped him mid-sentence with 3 quiet words. "That's not right, Buckley." He sputtered. "Now, Miss Turner, I'm just saying that given the—" "You've got $62 outstanding from March. I've got it written right here. But I don't need the book to tell you that. You pay $40 today, and we can work the rest into your next supply run." Buckley looked at her. He looked at Nathan Cole, who was standing to one side, watching. He looked back at Abigail. "Fine," he said. Nathan said nothing. He watched the whole exchange with those calm gray eyes, and when Buckley left, he turned and looked at Abigail with an expression she couldn't read. "You do that often?" he asked. "Every week," she said. He nodded once, slowly. It was the second trader who changed everything. His name was Roy Pratt, and he had been a source of low-grade trouble for the Turner Post for 2 years, always pushing the edge of what was fair, always testing to see what he could get away with. He was a big man, not clean, with a habit of leaning over the counter when he talked to Abigail that she had learned to simply endure. He came in late morning, while Eleanor and Clara were in the back, and he set his list on the counter and looked at Abigail the way he always did, like she was a fixture rather than a person. "Need 40 pounds of flour, 10 of salt, 2 of the tobacco." "You've got an outstanding balance," Abigail said. "I know I've got a balance, Turner. I'll settle it next month." "You said that last month." He leaned forward on the counter. "Look, I've known your family for years. You know I'm good for it." "I know you owe us $19, and I know that's what you said in April and in May." She looked at him steadily. "Pay $10 now, and I'll give you half your list." Roy Pratt's jaw tightened. He looked around the store, noticed Nathan standing near the far wall, and something shifted in his posture. Not quite threat, but the posturing of a man who wants to look like he isn't backing down. "Your daddy would have given me credit." The room went quiet. It was the cruelest thing he could have said, and they both knew it. Abigail felt it land, felt the old, familiar sting of it, the implication that she was lesser, that a dead man's judgment outranked hers in her own store. She kept her face steady. "My father is not here, Mr. Pratt. I am. $10. "That's not a neighborly way to—" "Roy!" Nathan's voice came from across the store, low and even. He hadn't moved. He was still leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, hat pulled low. "Pay the woman." Pratt turned. "Cole, didn't see you there." "I know you didn't." Nathan straightened up slowly. "Pay the $10. Take your half list. Everybody goes home." The silence in the store had a fine, sharp edge to it. Pratt looked at Nathan for a long moment. Then he dug into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded bill and set it on the counter. Not placed, slapped, and stared at Abigail while he did it. "There," he said. "Thank you," Abigail said, and she counted out his order without another word. When he left, the bell above the door swinging behind him, she stood at the counter and breathed. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. But the place behind her sternum was not, and she pressed one palm against the edge of the counter for just a moment to anchor herself. "You didn't need me to do that," Nathan said from behind her. She didn't turn around. "No." "I know." A pause. "I did it anyway." She turned. He was closer than she expected. Not crowding her, just present, the way he seemed to always be. Watching her with that expression she still hadn't fully learned to read. "Why?" she asked. "Because he was rude," Nathan said. "And because a man like that only backs down when somebody he respects tells him to." He paused. "I didn't say it to undercut you. I want you to understand that." "I do understand it," she said. "Good." They looked at each other for a moment too long. Then Eleanor's voice came from the back room. "Abigail? Was that Pratt? Did he pay?" "He paid," Abigail called back. She looked at Nathan one more time. He had already looked away, or made himself look away, she thought, though she couldn't be certain. She went back to the ledger. He went back to the wall. But something had changed again. The air had shifted in a way that wasn't going back. Clara felt it. She had come out from the back room in time to see the last of the exchange, and she had stood in the doorway, watching with an expression that got more complicated the longer she held it. At lunch, she was quieter than usual. She pushed her food around and let the conversation move without her. And twice, Abigail caught her looking at Nathan with an expression that was not jealousy exactly, or not only jealousy, but something harder and more confused. That afternoon, when Nathan had gone out to the yard to look at the fence posts Eleanor claimed needed mending, a purely invented reason to give him something useful to do, Clara followed Abigail into the storeroom. "He backed you up with Pratt," she said. "He did. He didn't do that for me." Clara leaned against the doorframe. "He's barely looked at me today." Abigail lifted a crate and set it on the shelf. "Clara, don't say it." Clara's voice was tight. "Don't say something kind about it. I know what I look like, and I know what you look like, and I know how this has always worked, and I need you to just—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. Then, "Is he going to ask for you?" The crate sat heavy in Abigail's hands. "He hasn't said anything to me," she said. "But he might." "Clara, but he might," Clara said again, and her voice cracked on the second word in a way that was not anger at all, but something much more frightened. "Mama needs this, Abigail. The debt is worse than she's told you. She told me last month. We've got maybe until September before they can take the land. She's been counting on this. She's been counting on me, and I can see that I'm—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm not what he wants." Abigail set down the crate. She turned and looked at her sister. Really looked at her. Past the prettiness and the performance. At the 22-year-old girl underneath who had been handed a role to play before she was old enough to know what it cost. "You don't know what he wants," Abigail said carefully. "I know what I see," Clara said, "and I know what Mama needs. And I know that if he walks away from this house without choosing one of us—" She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't have to. The weight of it settled into the storeroom. Abigail picked up the crate again. Her hands were steady. "Let me talk to Mama tonight," she said. "About what?" "About the debt. The real number." She looked at Clara. "She's been protecting us both from it. I need to know what we're actually dealing with." Clara stared at her. "Why does that matter right now?" "Because," Abigail said, "if Nathan Cole is going to be part of solving this family's problems, he needs to know what those problems actually are, and he needs to hear it from somebody who won't dress it up." She met her sister's eyes. "That's me. It was always going to be me." Clara was quiet for a long time. "You like him," she said again, the way she had said it the night before. And this time Abigail didn't deflect. She looked at her younger sister, at the fear in her eyes, the real fear, underneath the beauty and the performance. And she told the truth. "Yes," she said quietly. "But that's not why I'm doing this." Clara looked at her for a moment more. Then she stepped back, and something in her face changed. Not acceptance exactly, but the beginning of it. Like a door opening on a room she hadn't known was there. She went back into the house without another word. Eleanor didn't want to talk about the debt. She had a gift for making a subject simply stop existing through sheer force of refusal. And when Abigail cornered her in the back room that evening, after supper, after Nathan had stepped outside again, and Clara had gone to bed with a headache that might or might not have been real, Eleanor tried every version of that gift. "Not tonight, Abigail." "Yes, tonight. Clara told me September." Eleanor's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending. "Clara talks too much." Clara was scared and needed someone to talk to. Abigail sat down across from her. "Mama, how much?" A long silence. $240, Eleanor said finally, and said it like it cost her something physical. Abigail absorbed that. To who? Harlan's Mill, 2 seasons of credit, and the seed supplier in Cheyenne. She paused. And a small note to Pratt's cousin. Pratt's cousin. Abigail closed her eyes for one moment. Mama. Your father dealt with him before he died. I inherited the arrangement. You should have told me. I didn't want to frighten you. I'm not frightened, Abigail said, and she kept her voice level, even though something in her chest was grinding. I'm trying to help. I can't help if I don't have the whole picture. She looked at her mother directly. Does Nathan Cole know any of this? Of course not. He needs to. Eleanor put down her mending. Her eyes went sharp. Absolutely not. We are not going to this man with our debts in our hands like we're begging. We're not begging. We're being honest. Abigail leaned forward. He's a practical man, Mama. He asked about the ledger. He watched me deal with Pratt. He is not coming here for a performance. He's coming here because he wants to know what is real. She paused. If he finds out later that we hid this from him, he'll feel deceived. And a man like that doesn't forgive deception easily. Eleanor stared at her for a long moment. When did you become so certain about what kind of man he is? She said slowly. Abigail held her gaze. I've been paying attention. The silence stretched. If you tell him, Eleanor said, her voice dropping very low, and he rides away. Then he wasn't the answer, Abigail said, and we find another one. She stood up. But I don't think he'll ride away. She left Eleanor with her mending and her fear and the particular quiet of a woman who is beginning to understand that the daughter she never counted on may be the only real card she has. Outside, the yard was hot and dark and still. Abigail walked out to where the fence met the creek path, and she was not surprised, not quite, when she heard his boot on the dry ground behind her. Miss Turner, Nathan said. Mr. Cole, she said. I need to tell you something about this family's finances. All of it. The real number. A pause. All right, he said quietly. And she told him. She told him every number, every creditor, every deadline. She kept her voice even and her hands still. And she looked at the dark tree line while she talked, not at him, because she was afraid of what she would see in his face. She told him about Pratt's cousin. She told him about September. She told him her mother didn't know she was saying this, and that Clara didn't know either, and that she was telling him not to manipulate him and not to beg, but because he had the right to make his decision with accurate information. When she stopped talking, the night was very quiet. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you're a straight-dealing man, she said, and straight-dealing men deserve straight information. Another silence. Your mother won't be happy. My mother will survive, Abigail said. She heard him exhale. It wasn't a laugh, and it wasn't a sigh. It was something in between. The sound of a man recalibrating, adjusting to something he hadn't expected. I need to think on some things, he said. Take all the time you need, she said. She turned to go back to the house. Miss Turner? His voice stopped her. She turned. He was standing very still in the dark, his hat in his hands again, looking at her with that steady, unreadable quality that she had been trying to decode since the moment she nearly walked into him in the kitchen doorway. The debt can be settled, he said quietly. That part's straightforward. Numbers are numbers. He paused. What I'm working out is the part that isn't numbers. Abigail looked at him. I don't know what that means, she said. No, he said. I don't reckon you do. He put his hat back on. Good night, Miss Turner. He went inside. Abigail stood in the hot dark, alone, and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. She was terrified of it. She had built walls against it for years, but it was there, alive and stubborn, pushing against everything she had carefully constructed to keep it out. She pressed her hand against her chest. Her heart was not steady at all. She didn't sleep that night either. But this time it wasn't the heat keeping her awake. It was his voice, circling in her head, the part that isn't numbers, and the particular helplessness of not knowing what it meant. Abigail Turner had spent her entire adult life solving problems that had definite answers. Numbers balanced or they didn't. A latch held or it didn't. A creditor paid or he didn't. She knew how to work inside certainty. She did not know what to do with a man who left her standing in the dark with half a sentence and walked away like that was enough. She was still turning it over when she heard the first noise. It was past midnight. The house had been still for hours. Her mother's breathing steady down the hall. Clara curled on her side. Nathan quiet in the small room off the back. The noise was outside, low and purposeful. The kind of sound that doesn't belong to the night's natural language. Abigail was out of bed before she fully understood why. She moved to the window. 3 men were in the yard. Not traveling men, not drifters passing through. These men were moving with intention. One heading toward the storage shed, one circling the back of the post, one standing near the water trough, watching the road. They moved like men who had decided something before they arrived, and were now simply executing it. Abigail's heart slammed once, hard, against her ribs. She crossed to the corner of the room where her father's shotgun lived, and she picked it up without hesitation, checking the load the way Thomas Turner had taught her. Quick, quiet, certain. She was at the bedroom door in 6 steps, and out in the hallway in 7, and she nearly collided with Nathan coming out of the back room. He saw the shotgun. He saw her face. He didn't ask a single question. 3, she said, barely a breath. He nodded. He already had his rifle. Storage shed, she said. That's what they're after. The supplies we can't afford to lose. Stay behind me. No. He looked at her, and even in the dark hallway she could see the flash of surprise, and then the fast recalibration. The same thing she had seen in him from the beginning, that quality of adjusting quickly to what was real instead of what he expected. He gave one short nod. Side door, he said. Quiet. They moved together. Behind them, Clara appeared in the hallway with wide eyes, and Abigail turned and said, low and hard, Wake Mama. Both of you stay in the house. Lock the front door. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Clara opened her mouth. Don't argue with me, Abigail said. Lock the door. Clara locked the door. The man at the storage shed had his shoulder against the lock when Abigail came around the corner of the building and said, very clearly, Get away from that door. He spun. He was young, younger than she expected, maybe 25, with frightened eyes and a desperation that was almost worse than coldness, because desperate men were unpredictable. He had a knife, not a gun, which told her something. Lady, just get away from the door, she said again, and she said it the way she said everything, level, final, without decoration. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at her. He made the calculation that most men made when they saw her for the first time. Wide and heavy and absolutely still. And this time, instead of dismissing her for it, he was afraid of it. He stepped back from the door. From the far side of the yard came a sharp sound, a scuffle, something hitting the ground. And then Nathan's voice, low and controlled. Down, stay down. 2 of them accounted for. The third man was the problem. He came from the direction of the road, and he was older than the others, and he had a different quality about him. Not desperate, but calculating, which was the more dangerous thing. He stopped when he saw Abigail. He looked at her slowly, the way men like Pratt looked at her, like she was an obstacle in his way rather than a person. "Put it down," he said. He had a gun. He kept it low, but present. "I don't think I will," Abigail said. "You're a woman, alone." "I'm not alone," she said. And then Nathan stepped out from the shadow at the corner of the building, rifle up, and the man with the gun recalculated very quickly. There was a moment, one of those moments that stretches, where everything was still and the air between the four of them held every possible version of what could happen next. Abigail felt it. She stood with a shotgun steady against her shoulder, and she did not move, and she did not breathe, and she held the man's eyes with hers, and she did not look away. He looked away first. "All right," he said. He set the gun down slowly. "All right." The young one by the door ran. Nathan let him go, watched him go, made a deliberate choice, because a scared boy running into the dark was less dangerous than pushing a cornered man. The one on the ground stayed on the ground. The older man stood with his hands up and his gun in the dirt and his jaw tight with the humiliation of it. "This post's under debt," he said, as if that justified something. "We heard the supplies weren't guarded." "You heard wrong," Abigail said. "Clearly." He looked at her with something that was grudging, almost respectful, and entirely unwilling. "Who told you they were coming?" she asked Nathan later, inside, when the two men were tied to the fence post, and she had sent Clara to wake the nearest neighbor who could ride for the county marshal. Nathan had looked at her for a moment before answering. "Nobody told me," he said. "Then why were you awake?" "Because you were," he said simply. She stared at him. "I heard you get up," he said. "Heard the window. Figured you'd seen something I should know about." He set his rifle against the wall. His voice was even, but there was something in his face, something he was working to keep still. "You could have woken me." "There wasn't time. There was time to check the load on that gun." "I always check the load," she said. "I know." His voice dropped. "That's not the point." She understood what he meant. The point was not competence. The point was that she had not thought to include him. That her first instinct, as it had always been, was to handle everything alone because she had never learned to expect that someone else would show up. She looked at her hands. They were steady. They were always steady. "Abigail," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked up. He was standing close, closer than he had been before, not quite an arm's length, and his face had lost that careful, controlled quality and become something more direct. "You scared me," he said. "That's what I'm trying to say." She had no frame of reference for that sentence, not one that worked. She had never been the source of anyone's fear in that particular way. The fear that comes from caring, from watching someone you value walk toward danger. "I'm fine," she said. "I can see that." "Then, it doesn't matter that you're fine," he said. "I was scared for you anyway." The room was very quiet. Behind them, the sound of Eleanor moving through the house, Clara's voice coming from the front, the ordinary noise of the world reassembling itself. But in this small space between them, the quiet was complete and held something that was asking to be named. Abigail looked at him. "Don't," she said, and her voice, for the first time, was not steady. "Don't what?" "Don't say something you don't mean because the night got dramatic." She stepped back. One step, that was all. "I've had a long night and I am not—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I know what I look like, Mr. Cole. I know what most men see, and I am asking you, as plainly as I know how, not to be kind to me right now in a way that isn't real. I can't—" Her jaw tightened. "I can't afford it." The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He didn't fill the silence quickly. He stood in it, and she could see him choosing his words, the way she always chose hers, carefully, with full understanding of the weight they carried. "I'm not being kind," he said. "Nathan, I'm being honest." His voice was very quiet. "And I need you to let those be two different things. Because they are." She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed on whatever she might have said. He didn't push. He just stood there, patient and still, in the particular way of a man who has waited 12 years in a mountain valley and knows that forcing something open before it's ready only breaks it. Then Clara came back inside, and the moment folded up and was put away. The marshal arrived at dawn. He was a square, sun-worn man named Aldridge, who had seen most things the territory had to offer and was not impressed by any of them. He took the two men, listened to Abigail's account with professional attention, and made notes in a small book. He asked Nathan a few questions. He looked at Abigail twice, once when she described the third man's gun, and once when she described making the decision to come outside, with an expression that was measuredly impressed. "You handled that well, Miss Turner," he said. "Thank you, Marshal." "Your father taught you to shoot?" "Yes." He nodded. "Good man, Thomas Turner." He closed his notebook. "I'll need you to come to Laramie in the next week to sign a statement." "I'll be there," she said. He left. The morning opened up around the post in the strange, flattened way that mornings after crises always did, the ordinary tasks reasserting themselves over the extraordinary night, the world insisting on continuing. Abigail restocked the counter. Eleanor sat at the table and didn't speak for a long time, and then stood up and hugged Abigail without warning. A fierce, wordless grip that lasted 3 seconds, and then was released, Eleanor pulling back with her composure already reinstalled. "You were very brave," Eleanor said. "I was practical," Abigail said. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Something was moving behind her eyes, a reconsidering, slow and reluctant and real. "Sometimes those are the same thing," she said quietly. It was the closest Eleanor Turner had ever come to saying certain words. The twist that changed everything did not come from outside the house. It came from Roy Pratt's cousin. His name was Gerald Pratt, and he appeared at the trading post at noon, riding a horse that belonged to someone else, and carrying a document that had been prepared by a Cheyenne lawyer. He was not large and not loud. He was small and precise and entirely calm, which was worse. He set the document on the counter in front of Abigail and folded his hands and said, "That's a formal notice of debt collection. You've got 30 days. Abigail looked at the document. $60. The note her mother had mentioned. But the lawyer's fees added to it, and the compound interest written in language designed to confuse had turned it into something considerably larger. "This says 110, Abigail said. "Interest accrued," Gerald said pleasantly. "It's all itemized in Section 3. "This note was for $60. "That was the original principal. Your father signed it 6 years ago." He tapped the bottom of the page. "That's his signature." It was. Abigail stared at it. $60 at 6 years of compounded interest plus legal fees. 110, and 30 days to pay it. And if she couldn't, Section 4 was very clear about what happened to the land attached as collateral. "What land?" she said. Gerald smiled. It was a very small smile. "Section 4, Miss Turner." She read Section 4. The post. The land. The building. Her father's trading post. The thing he had built with his own hands and died believing he was leaving to his family. Collateral on a $60 note he had taken when he was sick and desperate and not reading carefully. The room was very still. 30 days, Gerald said. "We're prepared to negotiate a payment arrangement if that would be more—" "Get out," Abigail said. "Miss Turner, get out of my store." She said it the same way she said everything, level and absolute. But something had changed in her eyes, and Gerald Pratt read it accurately enough to pick up his hat and leave without another word. For 3 full seconds after the door closed, Abigail stood at the counter and did not move. Then Nathan came through from the back room where he had heard everything. She knew he had heard everything. He had been 10 feet away. And he stood on the other side of the counter and looked at her. 110, he said. Yes. 30 days. Yes. He was quiet. This is the first you've heard of this specific note, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. Her voice was very tight. Your father signed it. He was dying, she said. He didn't read it carefully. He trusted the man he shouldn't have trusted. She paused. That happens to people. It does, Nathan said. He was still looking at her with that steady attention. It's also the kind of note that can be challenged. The interest calculation on a note that old, a lawyer in Laramie could argue that. I don't have money for a lawyer in Laramie. No, he said, but I do. The silence that followed this was of a completely different kind than any that had come before. Abigail looked at him. No. Abigail, no. I told you about this family's finances because you deserved honest information. I didn't tell you so you could fix it. I know that. Then why are you? Because I want to, he said. And because I'm asking you to let me. His voice was quiet, but it had something under it. Something that was not transactional, not charitable, not the kindness of a stranger. This is not me paying off a debt. This is me asking to be involved in this family's future. He paused. In yours. The word landed somewhere inside her chest and did not leave. You haven't known me 3 days, she said. I've known you long enough, he said, and I think you know that. She stared at him. She thought about the kitchen table, the first morning, his hands around a coffee cup, no ceremony, no performance. She thought about the bread. She thought about Roy Pratt and the 2 quiet words, pay the woman, and the way he had said it without looking at her for credit, without making it about himself. She thought about the yard, the dark, his voice. I was scared for you anyway. She thought about 12 years alone in a mountain valley, and a man who said he was tired of doing what he was supposed to. I need you to understand something, she said. Her voice was steady again. It cost her something to make it so. I am not Clara. I will never be Clara. I am what you see. There's nothing else coming. She held his gaze. I am wide and plain, and I work hard, and I am not going to become something smaller to make a man comfortable. If that's what you're looking for. It's not, he said. You say that now. I'll say it in 10 years, he said. I'll say it in 20. He leaned forward slightly, his hands flat on the counter between them. I'm not looking for something to carry, Abigail. I'm looking for someone to stand next to. He paused. I think that's you. The morning held its breath. From the back of the house came Eleanor's footsteps, slow and deliberate, the way she moved when she was choosing whether to intrude. They both heard her stop. They both understood she was listening. Abigail looked at Nathan Cole across the counter of her father's trading post, and she felt something give way inside her. Not collapse. Give way. Like a door that had been held shut too long, finally moving on its hinges. It was terrifying, and it was also, underneath the terror, something she had no word for. Something that felt, if she was honest, and she was always honest, like relief. I can't answer you today, she said. I'm not asking for today, he said. I'm not in a hurry. The note. I'll deal with the note, he said, separate from everything else, as a neighborly matter, because that's what it is." His voice was firm. "And then, when that's settled, you can tell me what you think. On your own time, with nothing owed and nothing hanging over it." She looked at him for a long time. "That's a fair arrangement," she said finally. "I'm a fair man," he said. Behind the wall, they both heard Eleanor Turner let out a breath she had clearly been holding for a very long time. Abigail looked down at the counter. A small, private thing crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. The kind that happens when a person realizes they are being surprised by the world, and it isn't a bad surprise for once. She picked up the document Gerald Pratt had left and folded it precisely in half. "I'll get you the full ledger," she said. "The real one. Every number." "That'd be helpful," Nathan said. "Give me 20 minutes. She walked into the back room, past the shelves and the stacked goods and the repaired latch on the storage room door, into the small office space where she kept the true books. Not the simplified version she showed creditors, but the real accounting, raw and complete. She sat down at the small desk. She pulled out the ledger. Her hands, for the first time in as long as she could remember, were not quite steady. She let them be unsteady, just for a moment, just in private, where no one could see. Then she opened the book and began to write. Nathan rode to Laramie the next morning. He didn't make an announcement about it. He didn't ask permission, and he didn't explain himself at length. He came down to breakfast before sunrise, drank his coffee standing up the way he always did, and told Abigail simply, "I'll be back by Thursday. Keep the ledger somewhere I can find it when I get back." Then he picked up his hat and his rifle, and he walked out the door, and the sound of his horse faded down the wagon road and was gone. Abigail stood at the window and listened until there was nothing left to hear. "Thursday," Eleanor said from behind her. "That's what he said." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "That's 3 days." "I know how to count, Mama." "I'm not questioning your arithmetic." Eleanor set down her coffee cup. "I'm saying 3 days is a long time for a woman who isn't sleeping." Abigail turned from the window. "I'm sleeping fine." Eleanor looked at her daughter, really looked at her, the way she rarely allowed herself to do, because looking too closely at Abigail had always carried the particular guilt of a woman who had spent years looking at the wrong child. "You haven't slept more than 3 hours a night since he arrived," she said quietly. "I hear you in the kitchen before the birds." Abigail opened her mouth, closed it, said nothing. "I owe you an apology," Eleanor said. The word sat between them in the morning quiet, like something that had been waiting a long time for the right door. "Mama, don't tell me it isn't necessary," Eleanor said, and her voice had a firmness in it that was not her social firmness, not performance, but something stripped down to the actual bone of the woman underneath. "I brought him here for Clara. I put Clara in front of him and put you in the kitchen, and I told myself that was just the way of things, the practical arrangement." She paused. "I never asked what you thought about that arrangement." "It was practical," Abigail said. "It was wrong," Eleanor said. The kitchen was very still. Abigail looked at her mother, 51 years old, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and standing in the morning light with her hands at her sides and her chin up, doing the hardest thing she probably knew how to do, which was to be wrong, out loud, in front of someone she had underestimated. "Apology accepted," Abigail said, and she said it simply, without making Eleanor suffer for it longer than necessary, because that was who she was. "Now let me finish the books so I have everything ready when he gets back." Eleanor nodded. She started to leave, then stopped. "He's going to choose you," she said, without turning around. "He already has. I think you know that." Abigail didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. Clara was the harder conversation, and it happened on the second day. Abigail found her in the yard, sitting on the fence rail the way she had since childhood, her pretty face turned toward the road, watching the distance with an expression that was working very hard to look like nothing. Abigail climbed up beside her. The fence groaned under her weight, and she ignored it. and they sat side by side in the summer heat, the way they had not sat since they were girls. "You're not going to apologize to me," Clara said, before Abigail could speak. "No," Abigail agreed. "I'm not." "Good." Clara's voice was tight. "I'd hate it if you did." They were quiet for a moment. In the distance, a hawk circled something in the dry grass, patient and certain. "Do you actually care for him?" Clara asked. "Or is it just the attention? Because you've never had a man pay attention to—" She stopped. "That came out wrong." "No, it didn't," Abigail said. "Abigail, you meant it that way, and you should own it." Abigail kept her voice level. "Say it straight." Clara looked at her hands. "I mean, you've been invisible your whole life. And now a man is looking at you, and I don't know if you can tell the difference between caring for him and just needing to be seen." It was the sharpest thing Clara had ever said to her. Sharp, and not entirely wrong. Abigail sat with it for a full 10 seconds before she answered. "That is a fair question," she said. "And I've thought about it." She watched the hawk. "When I'm around him, I'm not thinking about being seen. I'm thinking about what he said last, what he might say next, whether he's right about the fence posts needing cedar instead of pine." She paused. "When I think about him riding back Thursday, my chest does something I don't have a word for. And I don't think that's about needing to be seen. I think that's just him." Clara was quiet. "That's different from how I feel," she said finally, and her voice had lost its edge. What was underneath was something younger and more honest. "When I think about a man, I think about how it looks, what people would say." She paused. "I don't think I've ever thought about fence posts." "You've never had to," Abigail said. "That's not a criticism. It's just true." "I know." Clara looked out at the road. "I'm 22 years old, and the most useful thing I know how to do is be pretty." She said it without self-pity, which made it worse. "That's not going to last forever." "No," Abigail said, "it's not." "So what do I do?" Abigail looked at her sister, 22 and beautiful and frightened in a way she was only now letting herself show. And she felt something in her chest that was not resentment at all, but something much older and more complicated. Something that was, under everything, love. "You learn the ledger," Abigail said. "I'll teach you." Clara stared at her. "The accounts?" "The full accounts. Numbers, suppliers, credit tracking. Everything." Abigail met her eyes. "You're not stupid, Clara. You've just never been asked to use your mind for anything that mattered. That changes now." Clara blinked. Something moved across her face. Surprise. And then something tentative and real pushing up underneath it, like a plant through hard ground. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "After everything I—" "Because you're my sister," Abigail said. "And because this family is going to need both of us to be more than we've been." She paused. "And because I think, if you tried, you'd be good at it." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "I was horrible to you," Clara said quietly. "Not just this week. My whole life." "I know. And you're my sister," Abigail said again. And this time, it was enough. Thursday arrived the way Nathan had said it would. No ceremony, just a horse on the road and a man getting down from it and carrying a saddlebag that was heavier than the one he'd left with. Abigail heard him from inside, and she made herself stay at the counter and finish entering the day's transactions before she went to the door. She gave herself that discipline. It was the only kind she had left. He came inside and set the saddlebag on the counter and looked at her. "The note's settled," he said. She stared. "Already?" The lawyer in Laramie reviewed the interest calculation. It was written fraudulently. The rate wasn't disclosed properly at signing. Under territory law, that voids the compound. He pulled a document from the saddlebag. Gerald Pratt's cousin accepted $62 in full settlement. That's the original principal, with 1 year's fair interest. He set the paper in front of her. It's done. Abigail looked at the document, her father's name on it, and the settlement agreement below, and Gerald Pratt's signature at the bottom, accepting the terms. She read it twice. Her throat was tight. "How much did the lawyer cost?" she said. "That's between me and the lawyer." "Nathan, Abigail." He said her name with quiet patience. "I told you. Neighborly matter. It's done." She looked up at him. He was watching her with that steady quality that she had stopped trying to decode and had started simply trusting, because decoding was another way of keeping her distance, and she was running out of reasons to keep her distance. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." A pause. The afternoon held them both in its particular stillness. "The ledger's in the office," she said. "I have everything organized. 4 years of accounts, broken down by category. The outstanding debts beyond the Pratt note, the credit relationships with the suppliers, the seasonal patterns in stock." She paused. "I thought you'd want to review it before we talked." "I do," he said. "But there's something I want to say first." She waited. He put both hands flat on the counter. That gesture she had come to recognize. The one that meant he was about to say something he had been turning over for a while, and had finally gotten all the way to a decision. "I went to Laramie, and I dealt with the legal matter," he said. "While I was there, I stopped at the land office, looked into what it would take to register a co-claim on the mountain property." He paused. "My name's on 40 acres of high valley land. Good land. Timber, water, decent growing season." Another pause. "I want to put a second name on it." The room was very quiet. "Nathan," she said carefully. "I'm not proposing marriage tonight," he said. "I know it's proper, and I know we haven't had time for proper." His voice was even, but she could hear the effort underneath it. A man who had spent 12 years alone and was now doing something that was, for him, profoundly vulnerable, and was doing it anyway. "I'm asking for the chance to court you, formally, with your mother's knowledge and your own choice, not your mother's." He met her eyes. "I'm asking you to let me show you who I am over time, and let me earn what I'm asking for." Abigail's hands were on the counter between them, and she looked at them. She thought about all the things she had told herself. The merchant's son, the years of being the woman in the kitchen, the architecture of protection she had built so carefully around herself, every wall she had constructed to keep from being surprised by hope. She thought about Clara's question, "Can you tell the difference between caring for him and needing to be seen?" She knew the answer. She raised her eyes to his. "My mother is in the back room," she said. "I know. She's going to cry. I figured. And she's going to immediately start planning things that are none of her business." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "I figured that too." Abigail took a breath. It was a steadying breath, the kind she took before difficult conversations, before hard numbers, before things that required her to be exactly who she was, with no adjustment for anyone's comfort. "Yes," she said. Just the one word, but it was the most complete word she had ever said. Nathan didn't reach for her hand, and he didn't make a speech. He just looked at her with those gray eyes and nodded once, slowly, like a man who has been holding his breath for a long time and has finally been given permission to stop. Then Eleanor appeared in the doorway from the back room, and she was not even pretending she hadn't heard. Her eyes were bright, and her composure was almost intact. "Mr. Cole," she said, with great dignity, "you'll stay for supper." "Yes, ma'am," he said.
"Thank you." "Clara," Eleanor called back over her shoulder, "set an extra place." "I heard," Clara called back, and her voice had something in it, something wry and a little sad and mostly real, that sounded like the beginning of a different version of herself.
The trouble came that evening. Not from outside this time. It came in the form of a man Abigail hadn't thought about in 2 years. James Holloway, a cattleman from the Eastern Valley who had asked for her hand 3 years ago when he was between wives and short on practical help, and had been refused and had not handled it with particular grace. He arrived at the trading post just as supper was being set, and he came in with the broad comfort of a man who expected his presence to be welcome. He stopped when he saw Nathan. His eyes moved from Nathan to Abigail, and then back to Nathan with a calculation that was not subtle. "Cole," he said. "Didn't know you'd come down out of the mountains." "Holloway," Nathan said. He had not stood up. He remained at the table with his coffee, entirely still, the way a man is still when he is paying close attention. "What brings you to Turner's?" Holloway asked. "Visiting," Nathan said. Holloway looked at Abigail again, a slow look, the kind he had given her 3 years ago, appraising, proprietary, as if she were a figure he was calculating rather than a person he was addressing. "Miss Turner, you're looking, well." "Mr. Holloway," she said, "what do you need?" "Just passing through. Thought I'd check on your situation. Heard you had some trouble with raiders 2 nights ago." "We handled it," she said. "So I heard." His eyes drifted to Nathan again. "Had some help, did you?" "She handled it," Nathan said. His voice was quiet, and the quietness had a quality to it that Holloway apparently understood, because something shifted in his posture. "I meant no offense," Holloway said, though his tone suggested he had meant precisely that. "None taken," Abigail said smoothly, because she had been managing men like James Holloway for 3 years, and she was better at it than anyone in the room knew. "What do you need from the post?" He named his items. She filled the order. She wrote the transaction in the ledger. She was perfectly professional and perfectly indifferent, and she did not once look at Nathan while Holloway was in the store, because she didn't need to. When the door closed behind him, Eleanor said to no one in particular, "That man has the manners of a fence post." "Less useful than a fence post," Nathan said, and picked up his coffee again. Clara made a sound that was almost a laugh. Abigail wrote the last number in the ledger and put down her pen and felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, the specific and unfamiliar feeling of being in a room where she was on the right side of something. Later, when Eleanor and Clara had gone to bed, and the trading post was quiet, Nathan stayed at the kitchen table, and Abigail brought the real ledger, the full one, 4 years deep, and set it between them, and they worked through it together, side by side, his finger tracking the columns, while she explained each entry in a low voice. It was not romantic. It was entirely practical. And it was the most intimate thing she had ever done with another person, because she was showing him the true thing, not the dressed-up version, not the face she put on for traders and creditors, but the actual accounting of how she had kept this family alive by herself for 3 years, through bad seasons and worse luck, and a debt her father left her that she hadn't known about, and a sister who couldn't help, and a mother who couldn't look. He didn't offer pity. He didn't offer praise. He asked questions, sharp, specific questions, that told her he understood what he was looking at. And she answered them, and when there was a number that was bad, she said it plainly, and he absorbed it plainly, and they moved on. At one point he said, "You should have been selling direct to the fort, cutting the Cheyenne supplier out of the middle." "I know," she said. "I didn't have the transport." "You do now," he said simply. "I've got 2 mules that do nothing in summer." She looked at him. "You're already planning," he said. "Yes." He turned a page. "Is that a problem?" She thought about it. "No," she said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it entirely. That the feeling of someone planning alongside her toward the same future was not a threat to her independence, but something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet, but was beginning to learn the shape of. The candle burned low between them. Outside, the summer night breathed its hot, dry air through the cracked window, and somewhere far off, a coyote said something to the dark and got no answer. "I wrote to my brother in Denver," Nathan said, without looking up from the ledger. "Told him I'd found the land partner I was looking for." Abigail went still. "Land partner," she said. "That's what I said." He turned another page. "He's going to have opinions about it. He always does." A pause. "I wanted you to know I've already told someone, so it's out there. Real." She understood what he was doing. He was making it real in the way that practical people make things real. Not with speeches, but with irreversible small actions. He had told someone. It existed now, outside the two of them and the kitchen table and the quiet house. She looked at his hands on the ledger page. Big hands, rough from work, the kind of hands that fixed things and built things and did not rest. "Your brother," she said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I found a woman who could outrun any trouble this territory cares to throw at her," Nathan said, "and that she makes exceptional bread." The laugh that came out of Abigail Turner was startled and short and entirely real. The kind that happens before you can decide whether to allow it. And she pressed her hand over her mouth a half-second too late, and Nathan looked up from the ledger, and the corner of his mouth had done that thing again, that barely there movement that she was beginning to understand was the fullest version of a smile he had. She composed herself. He looked back at the ledger, but the warmth of it stayed in the kitchen long after the candle had burned all the way down. 3 weeks passed the way good things sometimes do, faster than they should, and with a quality that made each day feel like something worth keeping. Nathan Cole did not leave. That was the fact the valley couldn't get past. He had come for 3 days, maybe 4, and he was still there at the end of the 3rd week, riding out to the mountain property every other morning to check his traps and his cattle, and returning by afternoon, arriving back at the Turner post with the particular ease of a man who knows where he's going. The neighbors noticed. The traders noticed. Roy Pratt's cousin noticed, from a safe distance, and said nothing because Nathan Cole's presence had a way of making certain conversations unnecessary. Abigail noticed too, though she would not have said so out loud. She noticed the way he took his coffee at her kitchen table, like he had always done it. She noticed that he had repaired 4 things around the post without being asked: the latch, a section of fencing, a warped board on the porch step, a rusted hinge on the shutter that had been banging in the summer wind for 2 months. He didn't mention the repairs. He just did them, the way a person does things in a place they have decided belongs to them in some important sense. She noticed, and she held it carefully, the way you hold something that could break. What she didn't notice, because she was focused on the ledger and the daily accounts and the teaching she had started with Clara, was that the valley had formed an opinion. She found out on a Tuesday. Martha Geary came to the trading post for sugar and coffee and stayed 20 minutes longer than she needed to, her small, sharp eyes moving between Abigail and the yard, where Nathan was mending fence, and finally said, in the tone of a woman delivering information she considers a public service, "People are talking, Abigail." "People always are," Abigail said, measuring the sugar. "They're saying Cole has lost his sense." Martha set her coin on the counter. "That he rode down out of the mountains looking for a wife and somehow ended up here, with you, instead of Clara." Abigail tied the sugar sack. "Is that what they're saying?" "Some are saying he feels sorry for you because of the debt situation and the raiders." The sugar sack went still in Abigail's hands. "And what do you say, Martha?" she asked. Her voice was level. It was always level. Martha had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable. "I say it isn't my business." "That's the right answer," Abigail said, and handed her the sugar. Martha left. Abigail stood at the counter for a moment after the door closed, her hand flat on the wood, breathing steadily. She was good at this. She had been doing this her entire life, absorbing the small cruelties of other people's assumptions and converting them to fuel instead of wounds. She was very good at it. But this one had found a crack, because it was the same fear she'd had from the beginning, wasn't it? The one she'd asked him about directly that night after the raiders. Don't say something kind that isn't real. He had answered her. He had answered her clearly, more than once, in more ways than words. She knew that. She knew it. She just needed to keep knowing it when nobody was watching. She didn't tell Nathan about Martha Geary. She told herself it was because it wasn't worth mentioning. But Clara, who had been behind the curtain to the back room and heard every word, had a different understanding of what was happening, and she sat with it for 2 days before she did something entirely unexpected. She told Nathan herself. Abigail found out about this because Nathan told her, that same evening, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with the ledger between them, saying it the same way he said everything, directly, without managing her reaction. Your sister told me what Martha Geary said. Abigail looked up. Clara told you. This afternoon, while you were with the supplier. He paused. She wanted me to know what was being said. She said she wasn't sure you'd tell me yourself. Abigail said nothing for a moment. She thought about Clara, 22 years old, learning the ledger columns, sitting at the counter with a pencil and a look of furious concentration, becoming someone new one slow day at a time, and she felt a rush of something warm and complicated that she didn't try to name. She was right, Abigail said. I wasn't going to tell you. Why? She put down her pen. Because I've been handling what people say about me since I was 12 years old. I don't need to import it into every conversation. That's not why, Nathan said. She looked at him. Excuse me? That's part of it, but not all of it. He was watching her with that calm, patient attention. You were afraid I'd confirm it. The kitchen was very still. That's not... She stopped. That's a presumptuous thing to say. I know, he said. Is it wrong? She stared at him. A man of few words, and every single one of them landed exactly where he aimed it. No, she said finally, quietly. It's not wrong. He leaned forward on the table. Listen to me, he said. People are going to talk about this for as long as we give them something to talk about. And then they're going to find someone else and forget about us entirely. That's what people do. His voice was quiet, but absolutely steady. What Martha Geary thinks happened here has nothing to do with what actually happened here. And I need you to hold on to what's real, because I can't do that for you. That part's yours. She held his gaze. I know it's real, she said. Good. She paused, picked her words slowly. I've spent 27 years being the woman that men look through. It's a habit, expecting to be looked through. She met his eyes. You keep looking at me directly, and I keep waiting for you to stop. I'm not going to stop, he said. I know that too, she said, rationally. Then trust the rational part, he said, and give the other part time. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. You're very practical for a man conducting a courtship. It's the only kind of man I know how to be, he said, and turned to the next page of the ledger. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, and it changed everything. It came addressed to Nathan Cole, care of the Turner Trading Post, from Denver, his brother, Robert. Abigail brought it to him in the yard, where he was splitting wood, an unnecessary task he had invented to be useful, and he set down the axe and opened it, and read it standing there with the morning sun on him, and she watched his face, and saw something cross it that she hadn't seen before. Not trouble, exactly. Something more complicated. What is it? She asked. He folded the letter. He didn't answer immediately, and she had learned that this meant he was deciding how to say something, not whether to. My brother's coming, he said. He and his wife. They'll be here by the end of the month. To meet me, Abigail said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he paused. He also writes that he's spoken to a man in Denver, a land buyer. The buyer has made an offer on the mountain property. A serious offer, more than the land is worth by current assessment. She went still. The 40 acres. Yes. That's your land. It is. He folded the letter again, smaller this time, as if he was trying to make it take up less space. He thinks I should consider it. Robert has always thought the mountain was impractical, too isolated, too hard to work alone. He paused. He didn't know, when he wrote this, that I wasn't planning on working it alone anymore. Abigail looked at him. Nathan, if that offer is good... It doesn't matter. It does matter. That's your livelihood, your independence. You can't... Abigail. He said her name the way he always said it, with a weight that was not pressure, but presence. Do you know why I stayed in those mountains 12 years? She waited. Because I built something with my own hands, and I didn't want to give it up to someone else's plan. He held her gaze. I'm not giving it up now. Not to my brother's plan, and not to a Denver buyer. A pause. I'm keeping it because I have a reason to. That's a different thing than keeping it out of stubbornness. That's keeping it because it has a future. He looked at her steadily. You understand the difference? She understood. She understood it exactly. Your brother is going to have opinions about me, she said. He'll have opinions about everything, Nathan said. That's what Robert does. You let him have them, and then you do what you were going to do anyway. The corner of his mouth moved. I've had 42 years of practice. What did his wife write? Abigail asked. The letter. Did she add anything? Nathan unfolded the letter again, looked at the bottom, and his expression did something subtle and good. She says she's heard I've finally done something sensible, and she's looking forward to meeting the woman responsible. Abigail stared at him. She wrote that? Margaret is a plain-spoken woman, Nathan said. You'll like her. Abigail looked at him, at this man who had come down from a mountain and turned her careful, defended life sideways, and she felt something she had been holding at arm's length take a decisive step closer. All right, she said. All right? Tell your brother to come, she said. I'll make bread. Nathan picked up the axe. That'll settle it, he said. Robert Cole arrived on a Wednesday, 11 days later, and he was exactly what Abigail had expected and nothing like it simultaneously. He was shorter than Nathan, broader through the chest, with the same gray eyes but a different energy. Faster, louder, the kind of man who fills a room with his presence on arrival. He came through the door of the trading post and looked at Abigail behind the counter, and she looked back at him, and they assessed each other in the way of two people who both understand they are being assessed. Miss Turner, he said. Mr. Cole, she said. Welcome to the post. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee, he said. Black. He settled himself at the counter, the way a man does when he intends to have a conversation rather than a transaction. Nathan tells me you keep the books here. I do. He tells me you face down armed raiders with a shotgun. 3 weeks ago, yes. He tells me... Robert paused, and something shifted in his expression, the rapid-fire assessment slowing down slightly. That you're the most capable woman he's met in 42 years of living. Abigail set the coffee in front of him. He said that specifically? Word for word, Robert said. Nathan doesn't use many words, but when he does, he means all of them. He wrapped his hands around the cup. I came here because I needed to see for myself. And what do you see? She asked. He looked at her for a moment, at her wide shoulders and her rough hands and her steady eyes and the ledger open on the counter beside her. And he said, with the bluntness of a man who had learned it from his brother, I see a woman running a business under conditions that would have finished most men. and I see my brother happy in a way I haven't seen in 20 years. He picked up his coffee. That's what I see. Abigail held his gaze. Your letter suggested he should sell the mountain property.
My letter was written before I knew the full situation, Robert said, without apology or defense. I've revised my thinking. How quickly? She asked. About 10 minutes after Nathan described you. He drank his coffee. I'm not a man who holds wrong opinions longer than necessary. She liked him immediately. Behind her, from the back room, she heard Nathan come through, and the sound of the two brothers speaking, low and brief, the shorthand of men who've known each other their whole lives. And then, Nathan's footsteps coming toward the counter, and his hand came down on the wood next to hers, not touching, just there. He behaving himself? Nathan asked. Impeccably, Abigail said. Robert looked at his brother's hand beside Abigail's on the counter, and then looked at his brother's face, and whatever he saw there made him set down his coffee and stop performing the interview. All right, he said quietly. All right. Margaret Cole was the twist nobody saw coming. She was 55, soft-spoken, with clever eyes and a way of entering a room that drew no attention and noticed everything. She found Abigail in the kitchen the first evening, sat down at the table without being invited, and said, Tell me about the ledger. Abigail turned from the stove. I beg your pardon? Nathan says you rebuilt this post's accounts from nothing after your father died. 4 years of solo management. Margaret folded her hands on the table. I manage Robert's business accounts in Denver. Have for 12 years. I want to know how you handled the supplier credit problem. Nathan mentioned it in his letter. Abigail stared at her for a moment. Then she sat down, and they talked for an hour. And it was the most equal conversation she had ever had with another person who wasn't Nathan, because Margaret Cole spoke to her like one competent woman speaking to another, without the slight adjustment in register that people usually made when they remembered what Abigail looked like. At the end of the hour, Margaret said, You know Nathan is planning to register the property in both names. He mentioned it, Abigail said carefully. He's not a man who mentions things he isn't certain about, Margaret said. I want you to know that. Whatever his brother writes in letters, Nathan has been certain about very few things in his life. When he is certain, he does not waver. She paused. He's been certain about you since the first letter he sent Robert. That was 2 days after he arrived here. Abigail went still. 2 days. He wrote, There is a woman here who has been carrying this family for 3 years without any acknowledgement from the world. I intend to acknowledge her. Margaret met her eyes. That was his first letter. Before he'd done anything, before he'd spoken to you at length. She paused. I thought you should know the timeline. Abigail thought about all her careful walls, all the architecture of protection she had built across 27 years of being looked through. She thought about lying awake on the first night, telling herself not to hope, and Nathan already putting words on paper across the hall. He didn't tell me that, she said. No, he wouldn't. Margaret's voice was dry and warm at once. Colemen believe that actions speak and words are supplemental. It is occasionally frustrating. She stood up. But in this case, I thought the word deserved to be heard. Abigail sat in the kitchen after Margaret left and pressed both palms flat on the table and breathed. She had been wrong about something important. She had been treating what was happening as something fragile, something that might still dissolve if she looked at it too directly. She had been bracing, the way she always braced, waiting for the version of events she had always been given. It wasn't fragile. It had started before she knew it was starting. It had been real before she let herself believe it was real. And a man she had met 4 weeks ago had written a letter about her 2 days in that said plainly, I intend to acknowledge her. She sat with that for a long time. This, on the last evening before Robert and Margaret left for Denver,
All 5 of them sat at the supper table. Eleanor, Clara, Nathan, Robert, Margaret. And Abigail brought out the bread and the good cloth and the matched plates, and they ate and talked, and the conversation moved with the ease of people who have found their way through the difficult first territory of knowing each other, and come out the other side. Robert told a story about Nathan at 19 that made Eleanor laugh so hard she had to set down her fork. Margaret asked Clara a question about the ledger columns, and Clara answered it, correctly and with confidence. And Abigail saw the small flash of pride in Clara's eyes, and said nothing, because Clara would not have wanted it pointed out. After supper, while Eleanor and Margaret talked on the porch, and Robert and Clara were doing the thing where Clara showed him the accounting books with the focused intensity of a person newly converted to a religion, Nathan and Abigail stood in the kitchen and did the dishes, side by side, in the comfortable quiet of people who don't need to fill silence. "Your brother is good," Abigail said. "He is," Nathan agreed. "He was testing me this morning, with the land question." "I know." "You let him." "You didn't need me to run interference," Nathan said. "You handled it." She handed him a plate to dry. He revised his thinking quickly. "Like I said, he doesn't hold wrong opinions long." Nathan dried the plate and set it on the rack. "You revised his thinking, not me." She passed him another plate. "Your sister-in-law told me something." "I figured she would." "You figured." "Margaret's never believed that actions alone are sufficient," he said. "She's been telling me for 20 years that I need to use more words." He was quiet for a moment. "She's right." Abigail stopped. She turned and looked at him. "You wrote that letter 2 days after you arrived here." He met her eyes. "Yes." "You were certain that fast." "I know what I'm looking at when I see it," he said simply. "Took me 12 years to find it. I wasn't going to miss it because I wanted more time to be sure." She held his gaze. There was something she had been carrying around the edges of, circling it, approaching and retreating, for 4 weeks. She had been waiting until she was certain, not of him, but of herself. Until the rational part and the frightened part had come into agreement. They had. "Nathan," she said. "Abigail." "I'm done waiting," she said. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not surprise, because he didn't surprise easily, but a quieting. Like a man who has been braced against wind that has finally stopped. "Done waiting for what?" he asked, carefully. "For a reason not to trust this," she said. "I've been looking for the reason to step back, and I can't find one." She kept her voice steady, because it was the only way she knew how to say true things, directly, without softening them into something smaller. "I've spent my entire life being practical, because I couldn't afford to be anything else. But I think I've been using practical as a place to hide." She paused. "I don't want to hide anymore." Nathan set down the plate he was holding. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying yes," she said. "To the property, to the partnership, to whatever this is." She held his gaze. "I'm saying I want it, not because I need rescuing, and not because the math works out. Because I want it." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan looked at her for a moment. That long, steady look that she had stopped trying to decode and had learned to simply live inside of. And then he said, "I'd like to ask your mother formally, tonight, if you're willing." "She's on the porch," Abigail said. "I know where she is," he said. He went to the porch. Abigail stood in the kitchen and listened to the low sound of his voice, and then Eleanor's, and then a silence, and then a sound from Eleanor that was not quite a word and was entirely unmistakable. Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her eyes were bright and her expression was complicated and entirely genuine. "He asked Mama," she said. "I heard." "Mama's crying." "I expected that." Robert is shaking his hand. Clara paused. I'm supposed to be upset about this. Are you? Abigail asked. Clara looked at her, really looked at her, the way she had been learning to look at things, directly, without the filter of what she was supposed to feel. No, she said. I'm not. She crossed the kitchen and hugged her sister with a sudden, fierce grip of someone who has been working up to it and finally decided to stop working and just do it. I'm glad it's you, she said against Abigail's shoulder. I mean it. I'm actually glad. Abigail put her arms around her sister and held on. Learn the rest of the ledger, she said. I'll be at the mountain property half the time. You'll need to run this place. Clara pulled back, looked at her. You think I can? I know you can, Abigail said. I've been watching you for 3 weeks. Clara straightened. Something settled in her face. Not the performance, not the prettiness deployed strategically, but something real and a little frightened and entirely her own. The beginning of a woman who was finding out what she was made of on her own terms. All right, Clara said. I'll learn the rest. Nathan came back through the door. He looked at Abigail across the kitchen, and she looked back at him, and the entire story of the last 4 weeks was in that look. The bread and the ledger and the yard at midnight, and the raiders and the note, and the letter from Denver, and 2 people circling something true until they both decided to stop circling. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her and looked at her the way he always looked at her. Directly, completely.